So the important thing I want you to think about in terms of Soviet Russia in the 1920s and 1930s is this rapid push for industrialization. And the communists are fairly effective in turning Russia into an industrialized economy. Remember that in years prior to the communist revolution, still most of Russia was very rural, very agrarian. The Industrial Revolution had not come to Russia to the extent that it had in Western Europe. So one of the things that the Soviets do is they encourage people to move off the farm and into the cities, into these industrial jobs and into the mines, so that Russia can become a modern industrial economy. The problem is that the only way to pay for this industrialization project is on the backs of the people who are still working the land. Uh, there, there was one group of farmers, of peasant farmers, who who were fairly well-to-do, and but I mean by well-to-do is not wealthy, but they were self-sufficient, and they were sort of free-spirited, and that is the kulaks. And the kulaks, um, the kulaks did not appreciate the Soviet endeavors to basically run their lives. And they put up a great deal of resistance, particularly when under Stalin, the communist government decides that they that they're not getting enough help from the countryside. And so they come up with this plan to consolidate all of the small farms. So if you can imagine a town or a community where you have dozens of individual farms. Each farm has a house on it, and it has a field, and it has barns, and cows, and farming implements, and all of those things are controlled by the individual farmer who raises a crop and sells it. Um, well, now imagine taking all of those small farms and putting them together under one manager, and that manager then decides what's going to get planted and who is going to get to, or how the crops are going to get sold, and whether or not the people that grew the crops are going to get anything out of their work, any benefit for their labor. This kind of collectivization is one of the reasons the Soviet experiment failed. It was tried in China, and after the communist revolution there in 1949, and it also failed very dramatically there. You really didn't start to see a return to prosperity in China until the late 1970s, when the communist government started relaxing and allowing people to farm their own plots. But going back to Russia in the 1920s under Stalin, the kulaks put up a fight. They didn't want to lose their farms. They didn't want someone else running the show. And so rather than just hand their stuff over to the communists, the kulaks decided that it would be better just to destroy their stuff. So they slaughtered their own livestock. They burned their barns. They destroyed farming implements. They destroyed crops. And for this, Stalin, of course, was very ticked off about that, and he sends the kulaks off to what is known as the Gulag. And I want you to be familiar with that term for the final exam. The Gulag is essentially the prison camp system maintained by the Soviet government. You see there the last bullet point, the NKVD. This is Stalin's secret police force. You've probably heard about the KGB, which is a successor organization with a similar mission. But the idea is that this is the watching eyes and ears of the government. Stalin creates a police state. Now, Western observers didn't necessarily understand what was going on in China, and a lot of, particularly sort of the naive sort of Western liberals, looked at what was going on in Russia um, and thought it looked wonderful. And here is an example of Soviet propaganda showing how happy these farmers are on their new collective farms in their new government tractors and harvesters. It was not until much later that people in the West began to realize the brutal nature of Stalin's regime. Interestingly enough, it was Winston Churchill, the British Prime Minister during World War II, who really first pointed out the extent of the totalitarian nature of the Soviet regime. And of course, he is also one of the early leaders to identify the threat of Adolf Hitler and to correctly assess what a danger he was to Europe. Now, as I have said, beginning in 1930, we start to see this worldwide economic depression unfold. Um, the so 1932, in direct response to the Depression, Franklin Roosevelt becomes president in the United States. Well, then, and actually to back up just a little bit, in Italy we have Mussolini, Benito Mussolini, who was born in 1883. He he becomes the leader of what is known as the Fascist Party in Italy. This is where we get the word fascism. A lot of people, when they think of fascism, primarily think of Nazi Germany, but the first use of the term actually comes from Italy. Um, the fasces was a bundle uh, carried by uh, the lictors who would march in front of and behind the Roman emperor. So this is kind of a throwback to the days when Rome was the capital of the world. And again, there's this. Remember, we've talked about nationalism. That is a key component in understanding fascism. Fascism definitely has a nationalist tinge. In other words, the idea that we are going to do strong things, we are going to do bold things, we're going to do aggressive things in the name of our nation, for the benefit of our nation. The fascists in Italy under Mussolini begin life as sort of organized gangs or pressure groups. Their goal was to intimidate politicians into doing things that the fascists wanted them to do. The fascist party, the fascist movement, has over 250,000 members by 1921. And by that point, they are strong enough um, to really be a force in Italian society, um, but not really a political force yet at that time. Um, they were not able to win elections, but that did not stop them. And so in 1922, Mussolini actually bullies the parliament into making him the prime minister, which is something that is very similar to what Hitler is able to accomplish in Germany. Mussolini begins packing the government with people who are personally loyal to him. And of course, this is one of the hallmarks of a dictator. Mussolini was a very charismatic individual. He gave riveting speeches. He was a master of propaganda. So, for example, one of his catchphrases was "Il Duce is always right." Il Duce, there you see the bullet point. That is the sort of the nickname for Mussolini. Now, in the next video, we will talk about Hitler and the Nazis and World War II.